In this example, we examine the case where the Warsaw Pact player did not acquire Hassfurt on game turn 1, and therefore did not launch an airmobile operation with the 900th Air Assault Battalion. Instead, he entered the first echelon of the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Division and reserved his Air Assault Battalion for use on game turn 2. This allowed the NATO player to get a unit into Hassfurt to defend the bridge. Here we are looking at the map at the start of the second game turn. During the Warsaw Pact planning phase, the Warsaw Pact player plans an assault operation with both the 117th Guards Motor Rifle Regiment here, and also for his off-map 900th Air Assault Battalion. Because he wishes to ultimately execute an assault on Hassfurt, and because the objective hex for an airmobile operation must be observed or acquired, when the 39th Guards activates, during the reconnaissance segment, the Warsaw Pact player makes another reconnaissance attempt on Hassfurt. He uses this unit here as a spotter at a range of 1, 2, 3 hexes, and he expends a reconnaissance point from his forward headquarters here to make the attempt. He refers to the reconnaissance table, and this time there is a NATO unit in the target hex, so he uses the city row, and he's at a range of 2 through 3, which informs him that he needs to roll a 7 or higher in order to acquire the hex. He rolls the die, and he does roll a 7, meaning that he acquires the hex. Because the target has been acquired, during the ensuing strike segment, the Warsaw Pact player makes a fire call with his forward headquarters here to his DAG here to execute a fire strike on the Bradley units in Hassfurt. His DAG fires with a fire strength of 6 times 3 steps, or 18, which becomes 9 after the standard division by 2. The Warsaw Pact player rolls the die, and he receives a 7. That means that his fire strike has inflicted 10 hits. The NATO player is defending in a city, so his adjusted defense strength is a native 3 plus 6 for the city, or 9, and therefore the 10 hits that come in are sufficient to kill one step and to require the remaining steps to disrupt, because the total number of hits that were inflicted exceeds their adjusted defense strength. We place a fired marker on the DAG, and that concludes the fire strike. During the ensuing operations segment, the Warsaw Pact player declares an assault operation, commits both the 117th Guards Motor Rifle Regiment and the 900th Air Assault Battalion to the operation, declares that it will be an airmobile operation, and then names Hassfurt as the objective hex. Because he has declared an airmobile operation, the Warsaw Pact player can declare either a ground movement pulse or an air movement pulse first. He declares that he will conduct his air movement pulse first. In this pulse, he brings in the entire airmobile battalion onto the map as a single force. So the helicopter unit enters the map, moves an unlimited distance across the map until it reaches a hex that is within 2 hexes of an enemy unit. And so here he will pause so that the NATO player can execute flak fire. The NATO unit here would normally project 2/3 of a flak point, and because it's disrupted, that fire's halved, it only projects 1/3 of a flak point, and 1/3 of flak point rolls down to 0. So unless he rolls a 10, this will have no effect. The NATO player rolls an 8 for no effect. The Warsaw Pact player then moves his helicopter stack 1 hex closer. Once again, the NATO player rolls at a 0 flak strength. He rolls a 2, that misses. The Warsaw Pact player now moves yet another hex. Now the NATO player would normally fire with 2 flak points for his 2 steps, but because he's disrupted, he fires with only 1 flak point. He rolls an 8, which becomes a 9. That also misses. And finally, he moves into his LZ hex, where he's trying to get, and the NATO player again now is going to roll with 1 flak point, and this time he rolls a 9, which goes up to a 10. That does inflict a hit check or abort result on the Warsaw Pact player's helicopters. The Warsaw Pact player elects to persevere and take the hit check. He rolls a die. The die roll is a 4, which is greater than or equal to the helicopter unit's defense strength of 2, which means that he must lose a step. Since he has lost a helicopter step, he must lose a passenger step, and the NATO player always gets to determine which unit dies. In this case, he will take the best unit in that stack, which is the BMD unit, and so that will become eliminated. The helicopter unit has now survived into its LZ hex here, and so it drops off the 2 remaining Airmobile companies. It now starts to head home. It is subject to flak again in this hex, and in this hex, and in this hex as it flies out. However, NATO's flak strength is not nearly strong enough to inflict a mandatory hit check, and any other result would simply be absorbed as an abort, and this unit is already heading home, so no further flak fire is executed as this unit leaves the NATO player's flak range and then ultimately flies off a friendly map edge and is returned to the friendly recovery box on the helicopter track. So this concludes the air movement pulse of this operation, and now the Warsaw Pact player needs to conduct the ground movement pulse. He has no need to move his 2 Airmobile companies here because they're already adjacent to the objective hex. However, he does have the 117th, so he moves the units of the 117th into attack position. This is an assault, so they have a movement allowance of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And that concludes the movement step of the entire operation. During the ensuing jamming step, the Warsaw Pact player uses his EW asset underneath his forward headquarters to conduct a jamming attempt against the objective hex. He consults the jamming table and rolls an 8. This is reduced by 1 for the close terrain in the objective hex, and another 1 because a NATO unit is defending in a town or city where it has access to the telephone net, so the modified die roll is a 6. This is sufficient to block any fire call for artillery, so the NATO artillery unit here will be unable to respond to a fire call. However, the NATO player is still capable of making a fire call with his headquarters unit here to an off-map attack helicopter unit. In the ensuing defensive fire call step, the NATO player does just that, taking 3 AH-1 attack helicopter steps from his ready box and bringing them on map from a friendly map edge. And he moves them until they are within 2 hexes of an enemy unit, whereupon he must pause to accept flak. The Warsaw Pact player declares that he can fire with a flak strength of 1. He rolls a 5, which becomes a 6, and that misses. The NATO player chooses to halt his attack helicopter in this hex, and play proceeds to the defensive fire step. The NATO player decides to focus his fire on the BMP unit here. His Bradley units in Hassford fire with a basic fire strength of 8. That fire strength is doubled for being infantry in a close terrain objective hex and halved for being disrupted for a net of 8. His attack helicopter unit fires with a fire strength of 12. 4 times 3 steps. 8 and 12 totals to 20, which becomes 10 after the standard division by 2. The NATO player consults the CRT and rolls a 3. That inflicts a -1 hit modifier, so his 10 hits becomes 9 hits actually inflicted. This is just sufficient to wipe out all 3 BMP steps in the target hex. The Warsaw Pact player now fires back. During his offensive fire call step, he could make a fire call from his forward headquarters, back here, to up to 2 artillery units because he's conducting an assault, and also to 1 attack helicopter regiment. However, he has no available artillery units within range, and as it turns out, he has no attack helicopters in his ready box, and therefore he makes no fire call. That leaves the assault with just the firepower that is available. So the 117th has 6 surviving steps times an attack strength of 4, which makes for 24. The 2 Airmobile companies on the other side of the river fire at 2 but halve for coming across the mine, and therefore the total effective fire strength is 25 halved to a 12. The Warsaw Pact player rolls the die. He rolls a 5, which means that he has inflicted a straight-up 12 hits. Normally, the NATO player would be able to elect to retreat, but because his unit in Hassford is disrupted, he does not have that option. His adjusted defense strength is 3, plus 6 for the city, or a total of 9. 12 hits have been inflicted. He absorbs 9 by losing a step, and he can ignore the remaining 3 hits. This concludes the assault operation. Note that if the original reconnaissance attempt against Hassford had failed, the Warsaw Pact player could still have conducted a normal, non-airmobile assault operation against Hassford with just the 117th Guards Motor Rifle Regiment. The 900th could not participate because that would have required the operation to be airmobile so it could enter the map, and that in turn would have required that the objective hex be acquired. Instead, the 900th would have had to execute its assault operation somewhere else or delay its entrance for another turn. And that concludes this clip.